it says, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. So I like the phrase right there, act like men. And because that's who I'm talking to right now is a lot of men in this room and any men, that's listening. But also the very next verse 14 says, let all that you do be done in love. So I don't know about you all, but I know growing up, a man was somebody that didn't show emotion. You never seen a man cry. Men were just always strong. They had it all together. And that's not always the case, honestly. I mean, I grew up seeing my dad that I never thought made a mistake. He was the toughest dude I ever knew. He could do anything and never had any struggles. He had it all together. And as I get older, I realize being a father and being an older man as myself and making the mistakes and things I've done, that's not true at all. Men biblically, we are supposed to lead a family and be the head of our household, as the Bible says, and, work, take care of your family financially. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's a lot of pressure, honestly, for men. When you struggle as a man, your family struggles. And when you struggle as a man, your kids struggle. And I never knew that until I struggled. When I started struggling and went through my little time there, that's when I realized that the Bible is no joke. Like, it's real and it's telling the truth. And, but men have a lot on our shoulders. You just think about that you're responsible for, how your wife acts, and you're responsible of the mistakes that she makes, when she's hurt because we hurt them or we don't listen to them, because we're not always great listeners, as a man. But, those things, what she gets into and how she feels, that's on us. If she's got hurt feelings and feels alone and feels like she's by herself in a marriage, that's because of us either not listening or being too busy. That's our kids too. When we're raising them, are we telling them the facts of what we've been through in our life? I know now, I wish that I would have knew more that was out there as far as mistakes that my parents had made, or the things that maybe they did wrong, or, what they've learned throughout their life, not necessarily being told, well, don't do these things as I'm telling you. Well, how do you know? Why shouldn't I go do that or go look at that stuff? Or, as a man growing up, like, where's, what am I weighing my decisions on? Well, it's not right to do, but, why shouldn't I? Because I think really as men, we should feed off of each other and learn off of each other. Some of these young guys in here, graduated school 2 years ago, they're starting their lives, then you've got, I'm 36 years old and got a family and got a boy going to graduate in a couple of years, like getting ready to start driving. There's some age difference in there, so the mistakes that I've made, you guys know them, but you should learn from me, like I should learn from the elders of the mistakes that, I'm not going to be afraid to tell you because I've already told a lot of you this. But, we look at those things, but we're here for that reason. We're not supposed to be the manly man that says, you'll be all right, suck it up, go on. Don't do this, don't do that. Well, what if you do? What if you do make a mistake? How do you fix that? Where do you go from at that point in time as a man when all you've been told is you don't cry, you don't show no emotion, just suck it up and go? Well, there's times in your life and the decisions that you make that it's hard to just suck it up and go because there ain't nowhere to go. And you find yourself in a low place as a man because it's a ton of pressure and you try to fix things. But when you allow things in or you get busy with life, working all the time, and we've all done it. And some may be in there right now working. I've done that. You get stressed out because that consumes your life. You're supposed to work, but when it continually happens all the time, you get short. We get grouchy. I mean, we're human. And so how's that reflecting though on our family? But we're getting decisions sometimes when we make bad ones out of being tired or maybe being hurt or carrying hurt or whatever it is. We live in a world where I can speak for me. I'm a people pleaser. I don't necessarily go about trying to please everybody, but I don't like anybody to have an ill feeling against me. So that kind of hurts me, and it makes me standoffish a little bit. If I walk into a room, if I used to walk in a room and find a group of people talking about me, I would shut off because I would already had the lack of confidence as a young boy from things that I went through. So I didn't have the confidence. So when I hear that, that was my hang up. Like, I didn't know where to go from there. You know what I mean? Like, people, I can't believe this. People talking about me and don't even know me, or they have there's a certain sense of opinion because I didn't have it for myself. I was a man that didn't, grew into a man that had a lack of confidence, that had to find something to hold on to because I carried some childhood hurt and some trauma around there. So when I look at this scripture and I see that act like men, I'm like, what is a man then? If everything we've been told that what we should not do and how we should carry ourselves, what is a man? Because I I think we all look at that way too. Well, man's like does manly stuff. They work out. My thing was like, man, they got muscles and they got a good job and they're hard workers and they're deer hunters and they like to go fish. They like to get their hands dirty. You know what I mean? Where they wear work boots and work pants and wear hats on. Like, you don't ever see them shed a tear. They're whatever. That's our picture definition of a man. But is that really what a man is? Not necessity, because the Bible dictates we're supposed to be like Christ's image. That's what a man is. A real man. I came to find out the hard way that I took a lot of pride in these manly things, working all the time, being successful and having money and driving nice trucks and working out all the time and having muscles. And I took pride in that, and that pride at the end of the day got me nowhere. When I ran toward those type of things that I thought was a manly version of what I was supposed to be, I kind of lost myself. I found myself getting farther and farther away from God, which is the bigger picture. Until you experience that, you're like, yes, that's what I've been told. I've been going to church. It's just like another Sunday. But when you find yourself in a deep pit because you turned your back and ran toward other things, that what didn't have your best interest in mind, at the end of the day, when you find yourself away from God, this stuff, it don't matter. The money you got, the truck you drive, the deer that you killed, like, I lost passion for everything. When I went down a wrong road and made those mistakes, I didn't care about nothing. I mean, hunting, I didn't care if I picked up a bow ever. If I killed another big deer, and I used to eat that stuff up, out fishing, could care less if I got in a boat, went fishing. And it got to me to the point where I didn't go to the gym, didn't care about lifting and working out. Don't mean anything. When you feel like your soul is gone and you're fighting for life, because that's what I was doing. And my point was fighting for life. I held on to these other things and made them idols compared to what I made my God. I made all these other things more important. And when it caught me in a lot of bad decisions. And, I felt myself dying because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to die, and I tried to do that. And if it wasn't for Jesus chasing me, I wouldn't be here today. And so now going forward, and when I see all this stuff, like, how am I supposed to be a man? How am I supposed to act? There's examples all over the Bible we can look at, all the stories, but I want to look at two. And the first one is Daniel. We all, if we've ever been raised in church, we know Daniel in the lion's den. Like, it's a common story you hear all the time because of the significance of it, and probably how terrifying it was to be in a den of lions, and how cool it was to hear somebody to go in there and then come out alive. Like, but that dude was courageous. He was a man. Like, he had people that were basically jealous of him because of the way he was acting. He prayed to God, and he was basically the king's go-to. And they're like, we're going to trip this dude up. Like, we're sick of this dude always, doing right and looking right. So they did. And so then when the king put out that order, he's like, hey, no praying to other gods. You're going to worship me. And he's like, I'm not doing that. So he didn't just cower like some men. I could see today men be like, well, I'm still going to pray to God, but I'm going to shut the windows. I'm going to hide so nobody knows. He didn't. Like, you know what I mean? And they looked over at David's house, or Daniel's house. He had the windows open, and he was still praying and open. Like, say something. I don't care how you look at me, but this is, I believe in God, and I'm praying to Him. Like, this is how I'm going to showcase my life, and he did it. And he came out victorious in the end. It was a miracle. And it's like, and it was death. He knew what was going to happen to him, but he went home. I don't think he even had to think about it. And then throwed him in the lion's den. He's like, this is cool because I know where I'm going. Dude had faith. So, and I look at another one, Mordecai, which you've all heard of, probably Esther. And we hear a story a lot about Esther, but she was raised by Mordecai. And so when he was, the king basically had a guy, basically anointing a guy to be, to say his first hand man or whatever. Hey, we're going to bow to him and honor this guy. And Mordecai was on the spot. He didn't have time to think. He's like, I'm not doing that. What do you mean? I'm not doing it. That was courageous. So they said, well, we're going to kill all the Jews. And we're going to do all this stuff. So he, Esther picked up his mantle. And I look at Mordecai like that. She picked up what he started, and she went and basically saved her people. She, marched in there to the king and his people, and she put a word in for her people, regardless. And I like what she said. She said, if I perish, I perish when I go in there. But I'm going to fight for what I know is right. And that's what these guys did, is they had so much courage as men, but they knew what was right. And so I give them two as an examples, because I think that's how we need to be living our life. A lot of times we'll step out on what football team is better. Is it the Bengals or is it the Browns? And we can argue for that for days. Like, I'm gonna stand on this, bud. Or it's the Buckeyes or nothing. You know what I mean? We ain't afraid of that. Or we're not afraid to battle over what bow we're shooting for hunting season. Well, Matthews is the best. Well, that's terrible. You got to shoot the bow tech. Like, nobody. We're not afraid to put our voices out there. And nobody talks about prime, Luke. They're in there, each his own. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, but when it comes to sharing the gospel or helping somebody, I mean, who's ever been guilty of shying off of it? I mean, I don't understand. Why is that? Because, everybody says that's the most important decision you ever make. And honestly, I never knew if that would be the most. I mean, I knew it was an important decision, and I knew it was the most important decision, but I never really understood it until I was sitting there knocking on death's door. And then now I understand that that's the most important decision that I'll ever make. But it wasn't me going to him. I turned my back and ran from that, and Jesus chased me. And that's why now I can say I don't care to share the gospel with anybody, because I shouldn't even be here. If it wasn't God's grace and chance after chance, all this stuff that I've done in my life that I thought was important man stuff, from the fish to the deer to the work to all helping, ball playing and coaching, like, well, it wasn't for nothing. It was all in vain, going, and didn't care about it. But, Jesus chased me is why I'm still here. So that's a challenge that I'm going to give us men that's sitting in here. Why aren't we sharing it to people? The greatest decision you'll ever make. I find myself telling that to somebody this week, and not everybody's had the luxury of going to church as a kid and being taken to church and being raised in church. So, there's a lot of people that don't have a clue, but it don't mean they're not struggling, and it don't mean that there's other men out there that's not having problems and they don't know where the answers are. But the answers is not in me, and the answers is not in any of us. We find out that we try to do these things on our own and they fall apart. We try to raise a family on our own without God, it falls apart. You may make it married for 50 years, but there's struggle there, tons of struggle, and your kids and whatever else. But that's a challenge I want to leave here with you guys today. Is what is a man now? What is a man that we should strive to be? And if you're not a man that's on his knees honoring God, you're not a man. Doing things on your own is going to leave you void and restless and tired, and you're not going to complete them. You can do a lot of things in your own self, but they mean nothing. Jesus is the answer for what he did for us. So moving forward, if you're not a dependent on God, what are you? You're independent. Means you can do things better than anybody else can do them, and we can't. And I hope it don't take some of us that long road to find out the hard way that there ain't nothing we can do outside of God's will that means anything. So in this time, I'm just going to put it out there for you guys to be surrenderers for Jesus. Surrender yourself, whatever it is He has you to do. If He has you to witness somebody on a job, that's tough too. And I don't understand that. Like your family and then people that you work with, like it's tough to witness to them. Why is that? You see them every day, and you're afraid of rejection. I think men are afraid of rejection. We're supposed to be manly men, and when somebody says, we don't want that, or we don't see things the way you see them, it's either one, turns you off, or two, makes you mad. You know what I mean? So it's a fine line there. So you don't want the turmoil or the rejection in your family, and you don't want the turmoil and the rejection on the job site that you got to see a dude every day. But, what's it matter if they get mad? In this point in time, I'm like, I don't want to make anybody mad. That's why verse 14 says, do whatever you do, let it be done in love. So if I go up and ask somebody, hey, Jesus, I'm going to listen, understand what they're going through, and not be like, bro, you need God right now. Like, you know what I mean? That's not the way to do it. Like, you ain't going to force it on nobody. But sharing your story will open people's ears. And, it's open mind. And a lot of times you don't want to listen to somebody preach the Bible verses at you. But that's what I'm going to challenge you guys today is, find somebody, search for somebody. I remember when I was in my deep depression, which I never thought I'd have got into. That was another pride thing as a man. 10 years ago, you would have never told me I'd have ever fought depression and wanted to commit suicide. You'd have never, I'd have said that was dumb and that was a choice. And somewhat it is a choice to allow yourself to get in there. But when you turn away from what is right and following Jesus, you slip in that hole real, real fast. And then getting out of it is not a decision. Like, it's not a choice. You wake up one day and say, I'm not going to be in depression. It's like depression, demonic depression is what it is. It's like somebody's doing things through you and you can't stop. And in your mind, I remember I could envision down the road, like, this is how I'm going to go out. Like, it was already planned in my head. This is what you're going to do because there's too much shame, too much guilt, and you're not going to come out of this hole, and this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to commit suicide. I'm thinking, I would have never thought that'd be me. Looking forward, like, there's no way. But without him, I wouldn't be here. So, again, I'm going to challenge you guys to, reach somebody, because I wish somebody would have reached me. And I remember my sister coming in here. Of all people, it was my sister, Chelsea. And she's hard-nosed. She's stubborn, like my dad would be, stubborn. And she marched her hind end through these doors, and I remember sitting in that chair in there in the house, and she would just tell me, like, something's going on. And I knew something was going on, but I rejected everybody that ever messaged me. Let's face it, guys, text messages, what do they do? It's good, people care about me, but when you're in that situation, you care less. I never messaged nobody back. My in-laws, my friends, people that I respected, I just ignored them, and they don't understand why. Well, I understand why, because I was trying to force everybody away because I was going to, off myself. That was just the end of it. I'm like, I'm not talking to anybody. I think Connor was one of them. He messaged me, and I just ducked him. He's like, Ashley, what's wrong with him? It didn't matter who, but she come in here and made the point, and it speaks volumes, even though I didn't say nothing. Like, I was a shell of a man, no emotion. I looked at the floor, never answered any of her questions, never responded. Like, it's hard for me to envision that now. You know what I mean? Like, what's going on? I don't really understand it, how I got there to that point. But she made a point, and that's what I'm getting at. She made a decision, like, I'm not just texting him or calling him, I'm going there. And so she made an example to me, like, that's what we need to do. When people are struggling, I was hoping somebody was going to kick the door down and get a hold of me, because that's what I needed. Would I got ticked off maybe, or who knows, may have. But it shows, I mean, what are you going to do if I wasn't here? How would people feel when when they're thinking about somebody and they're gone? There's nothing you can do then. It don't matter if they're mad at you or not. They're not here. So I look at myself now and the people that I'm around, like I see people struggling. You know what I mean? We all do. We all got them. And men that are struggling and they're fighting. And if they relay that, that they are struggling, we got to be men enough to talk to them. And you may have to be man enough to share your own story with them. Because again, they may respond to you of what you struggled through. Your struggles that the devil tries to make us sometimes as men feel alone, and that you're the only one that has any problems. You're the only one you're just weak and nobody will understand you and they don't want nothing to do with you. And that's what it'll get you feeling, full of shame or weak, and you isolate yourself. And that's the worst thing that we can do as men when we struggle, is isolate ourselves and not talk and not show any emotion, and try to hide ourselves away from everybody because we know we messed up, or what I mean, everything that runs through your head. As a men here that probably went through some stuff, that's what happens. And that's a dangerous place to be, because if you're not strong, that's the thing. Guy told me the other day. He said, your Christianity is like working out, basically. If you're not going to the weight room all the time and building your strength, do you get stronger by doing nothing? You don't. So if you're not constantly feeding yourself in the word and chasing Jesus and reading and using, if he tells you to talk to somebody and you're not doing it, you're going backwards. Like, there is no in between. You don't lift for 10 years and then quit lifting and stay muscle bound and bulky. Like, it don't happen. You get bulky because you probably get fat, you get overweight, but you're not lifting anymore. Your muscles are going to start getting weaker because you're not training them. He said it's the same way. And I agree with that some. So it all in there, we look at all these men, but remind ourselves daily, what is a man? And if you're not on your knees and being a servant for Jesus, you're not a true man.